despite my vows never to darken the doors of the university again, and the year of Canadians, the Canada's centennial, I embarked on a PhD. And the reason that this happened much later than my MA for the following reason. U of T was expanding, so back to education again. U of T was expanding in the 1960s in response to many forces, and once again, the course of my life was really influenced by the fact that there was a shortage of teachers, as there had been in the 60s for secondary schools. In the 50s for secondary schools. Having become known to members of the history department during my MA year, I was continually being drawn back into teaching at U of T to lead tutorials with special permission from OCE to do it during my teacher training year the first time I did it. After that, there were more calls from the history department to take on tutorials, and my CV tells me I was a TA in history not only in 58, 59, but also in 62, and continuously from 1964 to 67. As I've actually published elsewhere, the last call to do this work came on a very hot day in June when I happened to be scrubbing the kitchen floor. I suddenly found it really irritating to be asked in late June to take on tutorials, I think there were going to be 6 or 5, that were going begging for the following September. Since I loved the teaching, it suddenly occurred to me, or it gradually occurred to me, I'm not sure which, that maybe I should get the union ticket for this work, in other words, a doctorate. At some point before this, a chance meeting had shown me that such a thing was actually possible for a married woman with children. I went to a faculty wives event, possibly the only one I ever attended, and participated in a get-acquainted game that involved writing the name of one's undergraduate college or university on a sticker and sticking it on one's back. To my astonishment, I discovered another graduate of Smith College. Can you guess who it was? It was Natalie Zeman Davis. It was Natalie who asked probing questions eventually about my scholarly interest. What scholarly interest, I wondered. I mean, seriously, I didn't think I had any. But then she got me involved in a project that she and Sherman Workington, who was in the English department at U of T, and they developed this project to study female and male graduate students at U of T who were also parents in order to understand their concerns and suggest ways of encouraging their progress. And I guess both Natalie and Germaine had done their graduate work as parents, and so they knew that there were problems. I had the job of reading and summarizing the questionnaires the graduate student subjects of the study had filled out, and I was absolutely fascinated. Not only had Natalie completed a doctorate at the same time as she was having and raising 3 children, but 40, and I may say that also her husband was in jail for civil rights activism at that time, but 40 or so other women with children, and some men, were also right there in the 1960s combining parenthood and graduate study in Toronto. So what now seems almost the norm was really unusual to me at that time. Their problems were legion, and I learned about some unusual, very difficult ones, and it was mainly the women that had the problems, but not entirely. But it seemed that they were not insurmountable. I had an interesting time enrolling in the doctorate in history. The graduate secretary wanted to know what I intended to do with the doctorate after I got one. And I tried in a stumbling way to answer it. He also wanted to know who was going to look after my children. And I tried to figure that one out too. But he did admit me. And then I went to see my old MA professor, Morris Careless, who was a wonderful man. And when he learned of my continuing interest in the history of education, he advised me to come up here. Well, Oise wasn't here at this time, it was along Bloor Street that way. And to go see Willard Brayho, who taught at the then brand new Ontario Institute for Studies in Education on Bloor Street, of which at the time I had not even heard, because I was kind of isolated as a young mother. I duly went to see Willard, who told me that I should really be talking to the History and Philosophy Department's newest faculty member and historian of American education, Michael Katz. I met Michael in the summer of 1967, enrolled in his course, and never looked back. Because of the incredibly relaxed rules at U of T, I almost hate to tell you this, but they were very, very relaxed in the late 60s, owing to all the student agitation at the time. That was the only course I had to take. I met Paula in that fabulous course. There were setbacks. setbacks, I'd taken a million courses, I may say, as an undergraduate and for my MA, so it looked good on CV, on the record. There were setbacks, having 2 children with pneumonia, one after the other in the fall of '68, and then catching it myself was no picnic. But the result was a recognition that I had to have some help in the house. A delightful and elderly child care worker took over everything for a couple of weeks when I was really too sick, while I stayed in bed and planned an article I promised to write for a new textbook that was being prepared on the history of Canadian education. Although I recovered from the pneumonia, I kept catching colds and flu, which led me to answer an ad in the U of T bulletin that had been placed by the aunt and uncle of a wonderful young woman from Trinidad who needed a home in Toronto while she completed her secretarial course at Straw College. Roz Danton stayed with us for 3 years, helping with the evening meals and doing some babysitting, especially while I was teaching up at Atkins, and I had to be sure that there was somebody there in the evenings, those 2 evenings. I also spent a couple of weeks in Trinidad with her delightful family. When she finished with Shaw and had a few weeks before her first job, which happened to be a secretary, she became a secretary for Jim and his department, his physics department, and not just for Jim, but for his research group. She said, "You better just go to Trinidad and get over all these colds and flu and colds and pneumonia and so on." So I did, and I was cured. It was fantastic. And then I came back to get on a plane to go to Winnipeg. The NDP Federal Convention of, I think, 1969, the only one I ever attended again until well after 2000 when I went to my second NDP convention in Quebec City. That first convention saw me marching around a supermarket on behalf of Cesar Chavez and the great workers of California, and also witnessing the ejection of a radical group that some people in the room will know. It was called the Waffle from the Federal NDP. It was heady stuff. I just loved it. But it did not lead to further political activity on my part. It was clearly time to get more serious about my doctoral research. I sometimes wonder, I mean, this is just an aside, that if all higher education isn't a way to get young and bright people out of politics. Keep them busy in the university, the high schools, and the doctoral programs, and they won't be out there rabble rousing. Anyway, I wanted to get serious about my PhD, and Jim and I had another sabbatical coming up, and I needed to start working on my thesis. I did make a vow at the beginning of the PhD that I would only work when the kids were in school, never on weekends or in the evenings, and I more or less stuck to it until I started teaching again. This may be why my doctorate took a total of almost 7 years, from the fall of '67 to the January of '74, when it was finally granted. But by the end of the '60s, I was fully into my thesis research and loving it, burying myself in the archives with fascinating correspondence of the mid-19th century Ontario Education Department. And I later learned that Edgerton Ryerson and the Education Department's correspondence was larger in volume and numbers of letters and so on than the correspondence of the entire colonial office of the British Empire at that time. So there was a lot of correspondence to read. I didn't read it all. But anyway, I loved it. Then, I also had my first meeting with an avowed feminist. I eventually became good friends with Bonnie Kretz, one of the founders of the Toronto New Feminists, who I had the good luck to meet because she was married to a colleague of my husband's who had joined the physics department that year. Sorry, the same year I started my doctorate in '67. Bonnie opened my eyes to many things, first and foremost the existence of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, to which she made one of these individual submissions that we heard about it. I was astounded. I actually had not heard of the commission. I think I actually attended a commission hearing to witness her presentation. It's really dreadful to think that I can't be absolutely sure that I did that. Bonnie at first scared me a little. She was really dynamic, but I soon recognized a brilliant, warm, and courageous woman who had a lot to teach me. Bonnie and Rodney Kretz got us going to movies at Rochdale College, which some of you may know was quite a hippie outfit at that time. Another amazing phenomenon of the 1960s and a revelation in our young lives. And one cannot leave the 60s without mentioning the Beatles. One of my happiest memories of our friendship with the Kretz was going to see the Yellow Submarine with Bonnie, Rodney, and their daughter and our 2 boys. They either had a convertible or all the windows open, I can't remember. It was a very We drove home from the movie with the top down and all the windows open, singing, "We all live on the top of our lungs and having a great time." So it was first Natalie Davis and then Bonnie Kretz who gradually led me to see two things. First, how deeply women's issues were embedded in my life, from teaching to education to my family life. And secondly, how fortunate I was to have a calling in the work of education. When the 70s came along, I was ready to seek full-time work in higher education, and also to explore the feminist thinking, which would be increasingly available in that decade. Kate Millett's Sexual Politics came out in 1970. I read it, I think, in the fall of 71, or maybe the winter of 72, probably at Bonnie's suggestion, and knew that I too was a feminist. Thanks very much.